Hi, I'm looking to buy my first instrument. Nothing too fancy, just something simple.
Simple? Buddy, you've come to the right place. Biggest selection in Moonset, 2 time zones, and at least 1 underworld. Now picture this. Bam, a kazoo. Classic, affordable. Comes in blue, comes in red. Well, actually, that's a blood stain, but hey, you gotta play till you bleed, am I right, pimp?
I was actually thinking maybe a violin.
Violin? Sure. Elegant choice, real classy. Says I read Dostoevsky and get my news from Jake Tapper. Just a tiny disclaimer, though, this one cries blood after midnight. But hey, some folks like atmosphere. Now, what you really want is a tambourine.
No thanks, not really my style.
What? You mean the reen? Man, all the cool cats are playing with this nip, baby. Woodstock, Bonnaroo, most nurseries, you name it. They're all repping the reen machine.
I'll pass.
Your loss. Reen till I die.
That guitar looks pretty nice.
The guitar? Oh, no, you don't want that, trust me. Unless you like being hazed by a demonic biker gang every time you hit a G chord. But hey, ukulele, 4 strings, island vibe, 0 brimstone.
I'll pass on the ukulele.
What? You're kidding me. If this were the 2010s, female comedians would kill for a uke like this.
Well, it's neither the 2010s and neither am I a female comedian. What's wrong with the guitar?
Moving on, check out this recorder. Solid plastic, built to last, never once has summoned Beelzebub.
Is that a piano?
Grand even. Mahogany. Gorgeous. Only plays Chopin's funeral march, though, day and night. Won't stop. We've tried unplugging.
Right.
Hey, bonus deal. Buy now, I'll throw in the triangle. Only cursed on leap years.
Don't you have anything that isn't cursed?
Kazoo, $10.
Fine, I'll take the kazoo.
Dead man walking.
What did you just say?
Oh, I said, cool, man. Jockin'. It's Flemish. It means good luck. Good luck playing that kazoo. Yeah.
Jockin' isn't a real word.
Well, the kazoo's not a real instrument.
You know what? Forget it. I'll take the violin. Keep the kazoo.
Of course, sir. My apologies. The violin is yours.
Good day, sir.
Enjoy your practice. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived on opening night of a new symphony of sinew, an orchestra of ouch. Folks, tonight we're getting blisties on our fingers because tonight we're going to be talking about haunted musical instruments. Oh, that's right. Everybody gather in. We're at the Moonset Opera House right there on Creep Street. Moonset. Everybody's filing in. They're wanting to hear the latest in music. And they're about to get more than they bargained for, folks, because for most, music isn't so much a choice than it is a condition of the very air around us. And that doesn't mean we don't have a choice. It just means that for most of us, it's usually just there. You breathe, you whistle. As you walk to the store, your steps would fall into a rhythm. You'd start humming a tune in your head. But of course, music is older than even all of that. Older than cornfields and hymnals. Older than spoken language. The first fellow or gal to knock 2 sticks together, they probably weren't trying to invent art. Probably just trying to scare a wolf away or just break the monotony on a silent night. But once you hear that beat echo back, something ignites within you. And across oceans and centuries, people have kept at it until we have whole orchestras of sound, each instrument another way of saying what couldn't be said plainly. But the funny thing is, for all the joy and healing that music can bring, it also carries darkness. A fiddle can make your feet dance, yes, but it can also put you on the edge of your seat. A church organ fills a sanctuary with praise, but at night, when the janitor swears he heard that same organ playing by itself, you might wonder whose praise it was. Some folks will tell you a violin once owned by a desperate gambler carries his bad luck in its strings, or that an old piano long since out of tune still remembers the funerals it played for. People say these things with a smile as though they don't quite believe them. And yet when the bow touches the strings and the key sinks beneath your finger, you feel the air change. You are not only heard, you might even feel watched. Music can lift a soul, but it can break it too. And sometimes late at night, you wonder if it's really you writing the song or if the song is merely channeling through you. There was once upon a time an instrument so peculiar it seems almost like a joke. The sort of thing that a child might invent on a rainy afternoon. But yet it was very real, and it quite nearly disappeared from the earth. A fragile, glittering contraption of glass said to carry with it a curse. Its sound was not like any fiddle or flute, but something stranger, as though the air itself had grown cold. And the rumors on folks' tongues was that its tones had a sinister effect on those who listened too long. The idea itself was old, going back as far as the Renaissance. You fill a glass with water, you wet your finger, and you draw it around the rim, slowly, carefully, and the note emerges, thin and wavering, as if it were not even meant for human ears at all. It has a sort of angelic tone to it. Add more glasses, fill them at different levels, and then you have yourself an orchestra of crystal voices. This type of instrument is called an idiophone, meaning it sings out of its own vibrations, not from strings or drums. When it is made of glass, it is often called a crystallophone. Well, it was in the 1740s in London that this odd form of music enjoyed a brief, shimmering moment in vogue. An Irishman named Richard Pockridge, part dreamer, part showman, he toured the Big Smoke, which is a nickname for London, I had no idea, with his row of goblets, which he called his glass harp. And Londoners, they came in droves to marvel at it, the way one might come to see a two-headed man. And then, as if the thing had been too delicate to survive, it perished in flames. Pockridge himself died in a fire that consumed not only his life, but his singular instrument, as though the goblets had insisted on taking him with them. Yet still the sound lingered in the imagination of others. The composer, Christopher Willibald Gluck, played upon glass and delighted his audiences. Edward de Laval, a man of learning and curiosity, became another champion of this strange music. De Laval was even a friend of Benjamin Franklin, who had the kind of mind that could look at a row of water glasses and see not just a parlor trick, but a whole new world of sound. And so this eerie voice of glass, born in kitchens and taverns, carried on into concert halls, delicate, treacherous, and never quite free of its whispered curse. Benjamin Franklin, he was a man who could not leave well enough alone. Where others saw a parlor trick, he saw a project. After watching Edward de Laval draw music from glass in 1761, Franklin went home restless, his mind buzzing like a hive. Soon he called over a glassblower named Charles James, and together they set about making something entirely new, something no one had ever quite imagined. They abandoned the row of goblets standing in their usual line, each filled with its own uncertain measure of water. Instead, Franklin ordered glass shaped into vases, each tuned already, each placed in a row that resembled a piano's keys. 37 of them, in fact, set upon a spindle that turned beneath the player's hand, spun smooth and steady by a foot pedal. The bowls were color-coded too, so you could see the tones as well as hear them. Blues and greens and reds, like a rainbow rearranged for the ear. And it was easier now and more exact. No more fussing with how much water to pour or whether the glass might tip. A player had only to wet their fingers and touch the spinning edge, and the sound came forth like a ghost at your call. With practice, a person could play not just one note, but 10 at once. The tones hovering and blending like a choir of crystal voices whispering out of the air. It was a miracle of invention, to be sure, but also a little unsettling for those who heard it. Franklin had built not just an instrument, but a doorway of sorts, a way of summoning sounds that seemed less like music and more like magic, as if the air itself had secrets to tell and only needed the right hand to free them. Franklin was as proud of his creation as any father would be of a newborn child, even giving his creation a name. At first he called it the glassy chord, which sounded like something half in jest, the sort of word you might coin in a letter to amuse a friend, but soon, as he christened it more grandly, the glass armonica, borrowing from the Italian armonica meaning harmony. And while Franklin had named his creation, the instrument would gather nicknames as it went out into the world. Some called it the glass harmonica, others the glass harmonium. It was the bowl organ to some, the hydrocrystallophone to others. In France, it was the harmonica de verre. In Germany, the harmonica de Franklin. As if people could not agree on what to call this voice that sounded unlike anything else. Yet despite its multiple names, the sound remained what it always was: haunting, delicate, and never quite of this earth. Benjamin Franklin would even later write of his invention, saying, quote, "The adventures of this instrument are that its tones are incomparably sweet beyond those of any other, that they may be swelled and softened at pleasure by stronger or weaker pressures of the finger and continued to any length, and that the instrument, being well tuned, never again wants tuning." When Franklin's harmonica first sang out in 1762, the world was captivated by a sound that was unlike anything people had heard before. Like a fragile, haunting voice of an angel, it caught on at once with other musicians. And for a time, the harmonica was the marvel of Europe, the toast of the salons and concert halls. Musicians hurried to master it, tinkering with its design as though perfection were always just one altercation away. Some tried adding keyboards to tame its strangeness, while others dampened the vibrations with pads to make the tones clearer. Still others even experimented with violin bows in place of bare fingers. But no matter the refinement, the sound itself refused to become ordinary. It shimmered in the air, light but unsettling, like a presence you couldn't see but felt all the same. And the great names of music even bent their ears to it. Baldassare Galuppi, Niccolo Gemelli, and then even the giants themselves, such as Mozart in 1791, and old Luddy Beethoven in 1814. They wrote specifically for it, charmed and confounded by its glassy voice. Their compositions played before halls filled to the brim with listeners hungry for that eerie sound. Even beyond the composers, the harmonica drew admirers of all different sorts. George Washington himself is said to have tried his hand at it. The father of a nation bending over bowls of glass, attempting to coax from them a tune. Marie Antoinette, too, before history swept her away, pressed her fingers to the spinning rims and drew forth the sound of eternity, much as she was fragile and doomed. For a season, the harmonica was everywhere, an instrument that seemed both too delicate and too dangerous to last. Yet, no matter how bright the applause, shadows began to gather around the harmonica. People gossiped that the very quality that made it sound so otherworldly is also what made it so dangerous. Those shimmering tones were beautiful, yes, but too beautiful. Much like light reflected off broken glass, the sound was said to do harm if one listened too long. The stories spread quickly. Listeners spoke of dizziness, headaches that would not leave. Some even fainted, others complained of nausea or woke up the next morning with a nosebleed. Sounds like an excuse to me, but anyway, doctors shook their heads and murmured about nerve damage even. The more lurid tales claimed it went even further, that the harmonica carried with it a sorrow that clung to the very soul of the person hearing it, draping listeners in melancholy, and in some cases bringing on thoughts so dark that a person could no longer bear them. They said it could tip a mind into madness, stir psychosis, and unravel sanity altogether. Even those who played it were not safe. Mary Ann Davies, kin to Franklin himself, learned the instrument and toured with her sister, a talented singer. But her life took a sharp decline, and some claimed the harmonica had drawn her into despair, as though each note she coaxed from the glass had taken something from her in return. The German musicologist Friedrich Rochlitz, no fool and no lover of idle superstition, mind you, once recommended that the harmonica be played sparingly, and never by those already prone to sadness or unsteady in the mind. For such people, he warned, the music might open up a door that they would not be able to close. It almost sounds like it needs like a doctor's warning, like at the end of like a commercial for a prescription pill. It almost sounds like it. The harmonica must be used sparingly. Please contact a doctor if you wake up with nosebleeds. And so the harmonica's fame carried with it an unease. The sound, as lovely as a lullaby, but whispered to have a power to undo the very ones who listened to it. Rochlitz wrote of the harmonica's effects, saying, quote, "The harmonica excessively stimulates the nerves, plunges the player into a nagging depression, hints into a dark and melancholy mood that is an apt method for slow self-annihilation." Well, in time, the whispers grew louder, until the harmonica itself was said to be cursed. No accident, no illness, no untimely death was too distant to be pinned on its shimmering tones. If a player happened to faint on stage, or if a listener fell ill after a concert, if a neighbor died unexpectedly, it was the harmonica, people said, nodding with a grim certainty that attends all superstition. The music had reached out and taken its due. Of course, how much truth lived in these tales is hard to know and impossible to tell. Gossip has always had a way of sharpening its teeth the more it's passed along. Still, there are reasons, and scientific ones, mind you, that might explain why people felt so strangely after hearing it. The harmonica's tones dwell in an odd corner of sound between 1 and 4 kilohertz, a narrow band where the human ear struggles. At those pitches, the brain cannot easily tell where the sound is coming from. It drifts and it hovers and it unsettles. So to sit and listen was to surrender your bearings, to feel the world tilt just a little bit. Like walking across a frozen pond and hearing the ice crack somewhere behind you, though you cannot say from which direction. The confusion, the dizziness, even the faintness, these may not have been curses after all, but the natural result of a sound that disorients the very sense by which we place ourselves in the world. And yet, whether science or superstition, the harmonica carried its reputation, a ghostly voice blamed for misfortune, its notes both music and an accusation. And I thought that was interesting, the idea of, we know there's such a thing as sound cannons, like police will use, things like that, militaries use. And then there's even hypothetical or ones from conspiracies, like the idea of certain notes the government could put on, like Havana syndrome, like someone from a distance could send like certain signals that would essentially disorient and make a person ill and whatnot. Now, you see someone strum a guitar, you know where it's coming from. The drums, you can see and it's kind of right. When you hear that sound, it does sound like it's coming from everywhere at once and nowhere at once in a way. Almost like it could be coming from your own head. The whole thing about between 1 and 4 kilohertz, do you know anything about how sound kind of affects the body in that way?
I'm not sure about in terms of how it affects the body, especially in that particular frequency range, but those frequencies are usually those are like harmonics. Most instruments, like the bass frequency that you're hearing, like the core frequency of the instrument, that's going to be under 1,000 hertz or 1 kilohertz. Now, those are audible frequencies, of course. We can hear up to about 20,000 hertz, I want to say, 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz. But they're very subtle. And so that kind of makes sense. Now, the other thing it kind of makes me think about is this idea of cymatics, which is that different frequencies cause particles to arrange in different configurations. And there's some science to this, not a whole lot of definitive, like what it means kind of thing, or actual applications, but it definitely lends itself to, these ideas of sound healing or sound therapy and things like that. So, there certainly is, beyond just the experience, the subjective experience of hearing the frequency, it does actually have a physical effect on things that we can measure, and we have. And so, it's not totally out of the realm of possibility to think of sounds that could be harmful.
Right. And just to clarify, like, a kilohertz is not necessarily the same as like a decibel. We're not talking about volume. It's about the scale, which maybe most people knew. I just wanted to clarify in case, like, kilohertz, like, it's not measuring the volume of something. Like when they say like a note that dogs can hear that humans can't, it doesn't mean it's so like loud that we can't hear it. It's that it's at a pitch or a tone that, like, wasn't it South Park that did that episode? It was called like the brown note that would make you shit your pants. So it's kind of like that, like we said, and there's, you lean into more conspiratorial. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not true either, and I'm sure there has been many government experiments with sound and how you can use that to basically control people. But also there's even in some UFO circles that they talk about maybe harmonics is actually how they travel. Like it's using harmonics is allowing them to pass through space, like harmonics having an effect on
the physical world, essentially.
Exactly. And maybe that's how they can pass grand distances in a kind of like opening up that, maybe that is how you open up that rift in space-time or whatever. Well, folks, there's actually another explanation put forth, and one less mystical but no less grim. Some said the harmonica was dangerous because of the very glass it was made from. Because in those days, glass often carried lead within it. And lead was quite a killer that touched nearly every corner of the 18th and 19th centuries. People ate off of it, drank from it, painted their walls with it, and slowly would suffer from it. Lead poisoning is an awful affliction. It begins with headaches, perhaps a temper that frays too easily, memory that slips away like water through your fingers. And then it deepens. There's anemia, seizures, and in the darkest cases, coma, and even death. All the things whispered about the harmonica, the melancholy, the weakness, fatigue, the mind growing unsteady, could have been a familiar toll of lead poisoning. That is something we hear about a lot. They talked about how, like Roman plumbing had a lot of lead in it, and maybe that's why folks like Caligula were so fucking batshit nuts and would do all these crazy things, or why I think it was in the 1970s when they mandated the unleading of gasoline, and how, like, they say the 1970s was like the peak of like serial killer center, like that was like in all the major cities, like the 70s going into the 80s. Like obviously serial killers still exist, but there's many things that lead to one being a serial killer. It's not just a one-stop shop. But when you think about it and you think, oh, a congested area like New York or something where that is in the atmosphere more often, it's trapped in the buildings and there's just the sheer amount of cars on this road. Yeah, okay, I could see that, why that would suddenly you get a Son of Sam or a Night Stalker out of. Obviously, those folks also there was other things that led to, and some are born evil, some, were abused, but if you add to it this ingredient, it certainly doesn't help.
It could exacerbate it on a large scale,
Exactly.
Obviously, there's always individual, everything is case by case, but when you look at a large group, a large population, there can be other factors that contribute to a pervasive pattern.
Right. And yet the truth remains uncertain to this day. Tests suggest that the harmonica may have contained only trace amounts of lead, hardly enough to harm a player simply by touch. Now, whether the fingers that brushed those spinning rims absorbed anything at all is question without a firm answer. Still, the suspicion lingered. In an age when tragedy often arrived without explanation, the harmonica stood ready as a culprit. Whether cursed by its sound or poisoned by its substance, it bore the blame, and the music itself grew heavy with unease. Whatever the cause, be it the rumors of madness or the suspicion of lead poisoning or simply the unease that clung to its tones, the talk of a curse helped bring the harmonica down. By the early years of the 19th century, its rise had already begun to falter. The very things that made it uncanny also made it practical. Glass, after all, is fragile. So were the harmonicas built from it. And music itself was changing. Concert halls were getting big, baby. Ceilings were getting high. Audiences were getting hungrier for more and more grandeur. Against the roar of strings and the brassy thunder of horns and the breath and boom of woodwinds and drums, the harmonica's ghostly hum really just couldn't hold its own. Its willowy voice might fill a parlor, might even haunt a salon, but in this new age of cathedrals of music, it faded like a whisper in the wind. Now, today, of course, you would mic them. That's how, like a band, they still do it today with their guitars. If they're playing with certain guitar, they'll mic their. That's what we would do today. But obviously, that sort of technology didn't really exist at the time, and so it kind of helped allow the harmonica to just fall out of favor because its sound just couldn't hold up against what was happening in music at the time, essentially. Furthermore, tastes simply just turned elsewhere. The people wanted boldness, brilliance, and above all, volume. The thunderous sound of civilization on the move, not the trembling of a glass song. By 1830, the harmonica had all but vanished. No concerts or new compositions, no one left to turn the spindle or wet the fingertips. An instrument once hailed as the marvel of its age slipped away into silence as though it were a forgotten dream. And yet, like a voice you thought silenced, it finds its way back into the room. The harmonica has not vanished entirely. In recent years, it has stirred again in a resurrection of sorts. A handful of players keep the tradition alive, their fingers tracing the rims of new glass bowls. Though the originals, the true harmonicas of Franklin's time, are rare relics, kept mostly behind glass themselves in museums or private collections. What we hear now are imitations, careful recreations. The sound is close, but perhaps not quite the same. Whether it truly cursed those who played it and listened to it, or whether it was all the invention of rumor and imagination remains uncertain. But the tale endures. A fragile, mysterious instrument that rose to greatness, fell into silence, and nearly disappeared from memory. A curiously odd chapter of musical history. And I wonder if that is the case. Like, to them, I mean, you would have to think back then, Mozart, Beethoven, they were rock stars of their day. I think back to a movie, A Complete Unknown, the Bob Dylan movie. A lot of it's based on his own memoir he wrote like 20 years ago. And there's this incredible scene where, he goes electric live at the Newport Folk Festival. And it's kind of represents a changing of the times. And maybe in a way it does. Now, obviously today, folk music still exists. It's not, we have obviously methods of keeping those kinds of music alive through recordings. And so new fans of it are born every day, older styles of music or older instruments, And because of that, they find ways of reinventing themselves in a way. Ooh, just had to take a quick pause there, Creep Street, just to give your poor palpitating heart a rest. If you're enjoying this episode, go ahead and follow us on Facebook, Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. That's right. And if once a week is not enough for you, just head on over to patreon.com for all sorts of goodies. We got 3 different tiers there, something for every tier. So get your fixins. We even got a free tier where you can listen to the weekly sketches before they go live on the episode. Now, without further ado, back to today's story. That brings us to a certain story, one of those sad, peculiar tales that drifts down to us from the 19th century about a young couple named Cornelius and Alice Butterfield. They left England and settled in Thistledown, Pennsylvania, for the sake of his business. Cornelius was puffed up with excitement for his plans. He was the kind of man who saw opportunity in a place where the streets were muddy and the winters were hard. Alice, however, did not share his enthusiasm. She was homesick, and the homesickness grew heavier with each passing day. The small town, the strange faces, the endless work of making do in a new land, it all weighed upon her. Music had been her solace back in London, the piano her one faithful companion, but Cornelius, her bastard husband, it said, would not buy her one. Perhaps he said they couldn't afford it, or perhaps he simply enjoyed the power of refusing her something she wanted. By most accounts, he was not a kind husband. It said he mocked her cooking, scolded her for mistakes both real and imagined, and, some said, beat her badly. So Alice went to a neighbor's house whenever she could, slipping away to sit at their piano. And there she transformed. Her touch was delicate, her voice rich and fine, and so sweet that one friend swore it was the loveliest sound he had ever heard. Stranger still were the songs themselves. They were not pieces anyone recognized, nor could anyone else repeat them. They seemed to belong to Alice alone, as if she were playing not from memory, but from some hidden well of music that only she could reach. There was something uncanny about it, this young woman pouring her sorrow into melodies that no one had ever heard before. Music that seemed to drift in from some place just beyond the edge of the known world. Alice did not live long in Thistledown. She died giving birth to her daughter Pansy. And though that alone was tragedy enough, the town could not help but whisper of darker things. They said that Cornelius had hastened her end, that his cruelty had not stopped at words or even blows, but had carried her to the grave. There was no proof, only rumor, but many were certain of it. What fed the suspicion further was what came after. For years, that bastard had denied Alice her piano. And now, with his wife buried, Cornelius moved into a fine new home and bought himself a grand piano, a magnificent instrument, polished and gleaming, its keys ivory white and ready to sing like a bird baby. The neighbors saw it carried in and thought of the young wife who had for so long begged him for such a thing, and they could not help but feel the sting of Cornelius's cruelty. The estate was large enough that Cornelius brought on a staff, a cook, a nursery maid for little Pansy, and his sister Elizabeth moved in to keep the household. And it was there, amidst the new wealth, fine furniture, that the haunting began. At first, it was just the sound, music drifting through the halls at odd hours, notes struck in the dead of night when the house ought to have been still. Servants crept downstairs to find the piano alive, its keys pressed by unseen hands. The music itself carried no doubt. It was brilliant, tender, and oh so very strange, just as Alice had played in her neighbor's parlor. Pieces no one knew, melodies no one could summon. They said it was her, come back to the instrument she had been denied, her sorrow and her genius echoing through the house. And each time the keys moved, each time the melody rose, it felt less like a haunting than a reproach, a finger pointed at the bastard husband she was tied to in life. Writer Emma May Buckingham reported on the phenomenon in 1905 in Modern Ghost Stories, saying, quote, "The sweet notes trembled all through the house, thrillingly clear and wonderfully pure, closing with Mendelssohn's Wedding March. Brother and sister and maids rushed downstairs and stared at each other in alarm when they met at the door of the drawing room. They looked into and under the piano. Then in every room and closet in the house, they examined the windows and outbuildings, but no one was to be found. They took off the lid of the piano to see if a mouse could have set it to playing, or to see if a music box might have been hidden within it. They searched everywhere in vain for the performer. The following night it was the same, and so on for several nights in succession. Neighbors were called in and declared that the parlor was haunted. The servants left the house in fear. Still the grand Steinway awoke the inmates of the house nightly with its dulcet tones. The keys could be seen moving up and down, while marches, quick steps, bits of operas followed each other in rapid succession, now swelling like martial music, grand and glorious, aging, dying away to a whisper, then rising like the sound of a storm or furious battle. The first intimation we had of their parlor being haunted was when its owner asked Mr. Dory if his piano ever got out of order and played right on of its own accord, and, when answered in the negative, told us why he had asked the question. He acknowledged that he was greatly puzzled, said he could give no solution to the mystery. He remarked that the keys were certainly manipulated by invisible fingers. Then, after a silence of a few minutes, he said, "The strangest part of it is that neither my sister nor myself are able to play this class of music, which we recognize as the work of the old masters, and the servants cannot tell one note from the other. Our neighbors are unable to whistle a single bar of it, let alone playing it. There is not another instrument of the kind on our street. My sister thought that someone had perhaps hidden a music box inside of the piano, but we have taken it all apart, had it tuned over anew, and searched everywhere, but found nothing. It plays beautifully such music as I have heard my late wife play on her father's piano." And then, as if to prove the whole thing had been personal, the music ceased, and it ceased when Cornelius Butterfield finally died. Only then did the piano grow still. No more midnight concerts, no unseen fingers at the keys. The house was quiet, and it was hard not to think that Alice had been waiting only for him, her ghost content to trouble no one else. Almost like it was he didn't maybe understand that it was, but it was almost like a warning that I'm waiting for you.
Like it was a haunting for him.
Exactly. It was like it was the fact that it stopped when he died. It's almost like it was waiting for him. The second he was crossed over, she had him, and she no longer needed to play. It almost sounds like something to keep you knowing the doom ahead of you. Pretty dark when you actually think about it in that context, and a kind of a sweet vengeance if he truly was the bastard that he was rumored to be. But ghostly music, folks, is not bound to just one family, nor even to one instrument. Because years later, another tale took shape, this time around a violin of astonishing beauty. It was said to have been crafted in 1769 for a king, no less. And the craftsman was one Joseph Hornsteiner. Its back alone was made from 365 separate inlaid pieces, as though the maker had carved the days of the year into wood, each fragment locked into place until it became a whole. It was a work of art admired as much for its craftsmanship as it was for its sound. In time, it came into the hands of a collector named Harold Gordon Cudworth. In 1945, he discovered what others had not, that the violin had more in it than merely music. He was at his mother's home in Wareham, playing Van Bien's The Broken Melody, and the instrument had a rich, resonant voice as he drew the bow across it with satisfaction. But in the middle of the piece, a sound rose up that was not his own. Cudworth described it as a rumbling, a deep and uncanny sound coming from the direction of the kitchen sink, a place where no violin ought to reach, as if the music had awakened something beneath the floorboards or behind the walls, something that listened and answered back in its own strange tongue. But slowly and gently, Cudworth laid his bow down, and the rumbling ceased. The house grew quiet, as though nothing had happened at all. But when he tried again, coaxing the violin back into the broken melody, the sound returned at once, louder this time, insistent, filling the rooms and seeming to rattle the air itself. It was no longer a distant mutter by the sink, but a voice that seemed to move through the whole house, as if the walls themselves were alive. The next night, he dared once more, and that was when the house began to protest. Objects shifted, some hurled outright across the room as though thrown by an invisible hand. As the violin sang, the house answered, a duet of melody and chaos. Each time he played, the pattern returned. The music was beautiful, divine even, but behind it came that low rumble, with the disturbance of unexplained noises, things moving on their own, in a sense that he was no longer playing for himself alone. His mother heard it too, that strange vibration thrumming from nowhere and everywhere at once. And one evening, as the melody rose, the latch on his front door shook violently, rattling as though some unseen guest demanded entry. He went downstairs to find that the door to his own room was slammed shut, though no living hand had touched it. Cudworth put the violin aside, turning instead to the piano, but waiting upon the keys was the sheet of music for the broken melody, placed there by hands unknown. As if the spirit within the violin would not be silenced, whether he was playing that violin or the piano, god dang it, he was going to be playing the broken melody. In the days that followed, Cudworth carried the mystery with him, unable or perhaps unwilling to let it go. He was giving a lesson to a young girl when he brought out the Hornsteiner violin and set the bow to the string once more. Again, he played the broken melody. And again, the house replied. The rumbling came deeper and louder than ever before, rolling through the room until it smothered the music altogether. It shook the air, rattled the walls and left the little girl and her family wide-eyed as the invisible presence made itself known. Pictures swayed on their hooks, objects shifted on their own accord as though every corner of the home had decided to come alive in symphony with that tune. Well, enough was enough. Cudworth, who had endured so many nights of this strange duet, finally laid the violin aside, and he would not play the cursed song again. The melody and the instrument together had proven too much, a partnership of beauty and terror too confounding to explain. And so the story ended not with an answer, but with silence. Cudworth lived on until 1989.
The year you were born.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. The house!
Oh my God.
The house is shaking! Oh God! But yes, Cudworth did die in the year of our Lord 1989, the year of the Lord of Creep Street's birth. But the violin itself slipped away, its whereabouts unknown. Perhaps it rests in some collection, its inlaid back gleaming quietly, waiting for the bow. Or perhaps it's gone for good, its music spent. No one can say for sure. Well, now and then, tales of such haunted instruments bubble up in the unlikeliest of places. One such account comes from a man who swears he once owned a haunted violin himself. He wrote that it was an antique, a model from the so-called Milan school of the 18th century. And it was certainly finely made and a testament unto itself, like all great instruments that have survived the centuries. But it carried something else too. Strange things began to happen once it entered his home. Other instruments, sitting innocently nearby, were discovered knocked over, toppled over as if shoved in anger. Some were even broken, with no person nearby to have laid a hand upon them. And always, somehow, the trouble seemed to orbit that one violin. It was not only the damage, but the air around it. It was charged with unease. It felt as though the instrument held a grudge that it couldn't voice. The man never said that he heard it play on its own, only that its presence seemed to disturb the peace of the rooms, sowing disorder and mistrust among the other instruments as though it resented any living company. Such is the nature of these stories, whether told around a parlor lamp in the 19th century or posted on a message board like Reddit. The haunted violin does not ask to be believed, it merely sits there quiet and inscrutable, while the world around it falls into disarray. The owner of this violin would say, quote, "Shortly after finishing this instrument and hanging it up in the humidity closet, strange things began to happen. Lights would go on and off by themselves. My daughter would wake me in the middle of the night to ask why I was standing in her room. She told me she could hear someone talking, but not very loud. 2 weeks ago, I had guests who slept in the same room as the closet where the violins are stored, and they told me that the touch lamp in the room kept turning on, and that even after unplugging it, they were awakened by someone touching their shoulders. But there was no one there. The real kicker is that last week the electricity went off for a while. And while the family and I were downstairs, the door to the upstairs guest room shut, and we could hear faint classical music coming from upstairs. We do not own any battery-powered radios. After my last experience, I do not discount the possibility that the new instrument could have a spirit with it. I took the violin out of the closet and placed it on the entertainment center. I then played a CD that was only solo piano music. If I left the room to go upstairs, or if I went down to the basement, and I and others who did not believe me could hear a violin begin to accompany the piano music. If we went back to the great room, the violin music stopped as soon as we were in sight of the haunted violin. And so, The stories wind their way right into our own time, as tales of haunted instruments refuse to be left behind with gaslights and horse-drawn carriages. One such account was published in 2011 by Fane Violins, a shop up in Minnesota. The witness was Andy Fane himself, a man in the business of fine instruments and not one much for telling tales. It began simply enough when one day a customer walked in to try a few violins. The man lingered over them, testing their voices, weighing their worth, and then he found one that he just could not put down, a German violin from 1870. By all appearances, it was nothing more than a well-crafted specimen of its kind. It was aged but dignified, carrying the history of a century or more in its varnish and wood. But it was still merely a violin, or at least it seemed. Of all the instruments in that shop, that very violin would soon prove to have something else within it. Something not written on the maker's label nor visible in the fine curve of its back. Something that would make its presence known in ways no craftsman could have planned. The witness was quoted saying, "I gave him several violins to play. After a short while, he kept coming back to one German instrument from about 1870. He kept playing other violins and then going, 'No, there's just something about that old German violin I really love.' Eventually, he played through all the violins and just kept coming back to that one. He spent most of the afternoon playing it. As he did, I could hear his playing improve dramatically, and I could hear the violin opening up and really singing for him. At the end of several hours, Mr. D said, 'Wow, I really love that violin. I really love that violin. I want to buy it. But my in-laws are coming into town tomorrow, and we're all heading up to the cabin. If it's still here in a couple of weeks when I get back, I'll know it was really meant for me.' 2 days later, I was opening up the shop, as usual, at 10 a.m. I opened the door, and there was a violin that had fallen off the rack and crashed to the ground. The scroll was cracked. My heart sunk when I realized it was the violin that Mr. D had really loved. Over the next few days, I did the best and fastest scroll repair I had ever done. Phew, I thought. I'll need to tell him about the damage, but it plays as nice and sounds as good as it did before. Maybe he'll be happy. I can't ask for much money. Well, days went by, and then weeks went by, and I didn't hear back from Mr. D, and another client played the violin and was interested in it. I explained how much Mr. D had loved the violin and that I wanted to at least call him before I sold it to anyone else. Luckily, the player understood. I called Mr. D's home the next day, and his adult son answered. I said who I was and asked to speak to Mr. D about the violin. His son said, "Yes, my dad was talking about that violin that evening. But I'm really sorry to tell you my dad passed away." I was shocked. He was a pretty healthy guy as far as I knew. I said, "I'm so sorry. I really liked your dad. How did it happen?" Mr. D's son said, "Well, my dad went up to the cabin ahead of the rest of us to fix things up a bit. We got up there at 10 the next morning. When we opened the door, there he was, just dead on the floor." I again said how sorry I was and asked when that happened. His son replied, "Oh, it was just 2 days after he was at your shop. 2 days after he was in the shop." That was the day that the violin that he loved had fallen off the rack. The violin that he really loved. I guess the feeling was mutual and very close. And independently, both his family and I have opened the door, walked in, and there, he and the violin were on the floor. Well, folks, violins have always seemed to touch a special place beyond the ordinary. They're elegant, yes, but more than that, they're almost mystical. They pass down through the years as though they've made a private pact with time, refusing to age in the way that mortal men and women do. Grandparents leave them to their children, who leave them to theirs, and still the instrument sings as if nothing has changed. It's no wonder, then, that they gather stories around them like barnacles on a ship. Whispers of hauntings, rumors of something unseen moving with the bow. Perhaps it's that quality of endurance that draws the supernatural close to it, as though the violin were a doorway between the living and whatever lingers after. Or perhaps it's simply the sound, so piercing and plaintive that it feels less like wooden string and more like some inner voice brought to the surface. A sound that demands a haunting, or at the very least, suggests one. What lies at the root of that all, no one can say. Are these only tales embroidered by memory and longing, or do the instruments themselves carry with them something unseen, some shadow of every hand that's ever played them? And well, we don't know, but the stories endure. And perhaps that answer is enough. For every time a bow is drawn across the strings, the question is asked again in the music's voice. Real or not, we have to decide for ourselves if we believe. But folks, let's get that classical music shit out of here. Let's talk about some goddamn rock and roll. What catalog of haunted instruments would be complete without a guitar? They are, after all, the embodiment of rock and roll, the 6-string version of Thor's hammer, of King Arthur's Excalibur, and in at least one story, it was not so much the guitar that seemed cursed, but the man who held it. Or even to be more specific, the position of the man who held it. The year was 1967, and for Peter Green, it was not the summer of love that history had labeled it. Green was the original guitarist who helped found Fleetwood Mac, a band destined for stardom. They would go on to rule the airwaves, their songs drifting into every car radio and grocery store, to today on every streaming platform. Their breakout album Rumors in 1977 became more than a record. It became a phenomenon. 31 straight weeks at the top of the U.S. charts, mama. 4 singles in the top 10. 19 million copies sold in America alone, and over 40 million worldwide. To this day, it remains one of the best-selling albums in history. 8, in fact, on the list. A monument of vinyl and memory. But behind those glowing numbers was Peter Green, a man whose story turned darker, and whose guitar and his music itself would become to feel less like a gift than it did like a burden. Fleetwood Mac is a band famous not only for its music, but for the shifting sands of its lineup. Members have come and gone like weather across the sea, and the only one to remain steady through all of it is drummer Mick Fleetwood. Most of those departures were the ordinary changes of a long-lived band, but the roles of the guitarist, that position, specifically in the band Fleetwood Mac, seemed to carry with it a streak of misfortune dark enough to raise eyebrows. It began with Peter Green, the founder, who in the early 1970s took too much acid and slipped away from the band he had helped build. His exit was followed by Jeremy Spencer, who wandered even further, strung out on mescaline, and pulled into the orbit of a strange religious sex cult in 1971. Not long after that, in 1972, guitarist Danny Kerwin suffered a public unraveling. On stage, he struck his head against the wall, then staggered into the audience, hurling insults at his bandmates before being carried away in a long decline. He spent time in asylums and would die homeless. A life once full of promise scattered to pieces. And that pattern didn't stop there. In 2012, the band lost 2 more of its guitarists. Bob Weston died suddenly of an aneurysm, and Bob Welch, suffering from illness and a loss of his mobility, sadly took his own life. Each name added another line to the tally. another shadow across the fretboard. And so it seemed that the guitarists of Fleetwood Mac bore a curse, one after another claimed by madness, misfortune, or death. And the only exception has been Lindsey Buckingham, whose survival stands out like a lone note that refuses to resolve, hanging in the air, waiting. I thought that was interesting, the idea of not so much an instrument or even the musician, but the role of a specific band. Like, oh my God, dude, I just got offered to play guitar in Fleetwood Mac. No, dude, you don't want to do that.
Don't take it. Don't take it.
Don't do it, man. What are you talking about? It's the Mac. It's like, it's kind of interesting to think of a role in a band being cursed. Well, folks, there's one more guitar we got to talk about. And this one, when it comes to guitars, not famous ones maybe, strummed in stadiums, but a plain, almost forgettable instrument, is the so-called satanic six-string. It was nothing to look at. The logo filed away, no brand to boast of. Just another guitar. The kind you might find in a pawn shop window. Strings a little loose, its body scuffed from years of playing. Ordinary in every way except for the stories that clung to it. Well, this tale goes back to 1979, when the guitar belonged to a teenager already steeped in the darker side of things. He had a fascination with the macabre and with ritual and occult practice. The sort of boy whose room was lined with candles and shadows, whose curiosity stretched farther than was safe, and probably dressed like Neo from The Matrix if you were in high school around when I was. And in his hands, the guitar seemed to carry more than music. From then on, the six-string was whispered about as an object not just of sound, but something sinister, a vessel for whatever he had called forth, whether intentional or not. A post selling the guitar on the website Reverb reads as follows. A kid that lived on my street when I was growing up was rumored to be into devil worship, seances, Aleister Crowley, black magic, and other dark endeavors of the spirit world. I later learned that this neophyte necromancer was born in June of '66 and died tragically on Halloween, 1979, when he was just 13 years old.
He was born in the 6th month of '66?
Oh my gosh, you're right. You are absolutely right. And then died when he was 13. Goodness gracious. His death has never been solved, but it culminates in a kid that was found lying in his bed with the guitar draped across it, apparently electrocuted, even though this is an acoustic guitar. Additionally, when the damnable corpse of this soulless stooge of Satan was eventually discovered, a 45 record of Blue Oyster Cult's Don't Fear the Reaper was playing repeatedly on the Mephistophelian Moppets GE Wildcat record changer. Years later, I ran into the defunct boy's mother, herself a propaganding practitioner of the pagan arts, and when I informed her that I was a professional guitarist, she offered me her devilish, daisy-pushing son's git fiddle. I've heard the strings discordantly ring out despite no one being near the guitar. Further, on 3 occasions I put the guitar in my bedroom closet only to find the guitar on my bed when I returned home, and I live alone. The final straw occurred when I saw the guitar levitate out of the trash can that I had somberly placed it in. It's better owned by someone more in tune with the tenebrous forces of the malevolent netherworld. Please use extreme caution when conjuring the phantasmic spirits that seem to be channeled through this iniquitous instrument. The guitar sold for a price of $666 and was bought by none other than Ghost Adventures host Zach Bagans. Bagans would say of the guitar, quote, "I don't play guitar very well, but you can rest assured that I will most definitely play this instrument and see if anything happens to me. I was really blown away by the story behind the guitar and how the seller got the guitar directly from the boy's mother. Because of that provenance, that's why I jumped in as fast as I could to buy the guitar. I was literally driving in my car when my phone started blowing up about the guitar for sale and was shocked when I was able to buy it because the musician who had the guitar experienced so much with it, including it levitating and playing by itself. I'll display it securely at the Haunted Museum for close observation. Well, the Satanic Six String now rests behind glass in Zach Bagans' museum, displayed alongside a menagerie of other cursed curiosities, such as dolls with dark reputations and mirrors said to hold malevolence. Trinkets that have gathered more fear than dust in visitors as they passed by, some leaning in with solemnity, others with a grin, wondering if this battered guitar truly hums with something unholy, or if it's nothing more than an elaborate prank or story spun by the fellow who put it up for sale. But that's the way of all these tales. Who can say for certain what lingers in a glass harmonica, a violin, or a guitar, or what madness, misfortune, and melody that drove their legends forward? We simply don't know. What we do know is that music has lived in the human heart for as long as we have had hands to make it. It stirs us, it consoles us, and terrifies us. And if places can be haunted, and objects, and whole houses and fields, then why not the very instruments through which we call sound into being? Perhaps every note leaves behind a trace, and when enough are gathered, they sing on without us. And folks, I thought that was an interesting way to end it, because it is true, music is something, obviously wildlife, they use sound to communicate or like anything, but music truly is, I would have to think there are few things, if you could record the human soul, few things I think do it more than music. If that metaphor makes...
Absolutely. Music is like the purest art of emotion. When you think about instrumental music, especially music with no lyrics whatsoever, it's universal. Anybody can understand it. You don't even have to know anything about music to understand it.
Exactly. And it's kind of like, you and me were talking about John Coltrane once, and I was talking about how I was listening to, I think, his Love Supreme album, which is very much an avant-garde, experimental, a lot of it improvised. And I was explaining how, as someone who's kind of new to jazz, doesn't know much about jazz, is a big music lover, but doesn't know much about jazz, and is sort of now getting into it. There's times when they're playing in time signatures that don't seem to make sense. But yet at the same time, it doesn't just sound like you're listening to noise. And you had a great quote of, it's about the context. Even if you don't understand it, it still makes sense in the context in which you're hearing it. And I think that's true. It's like our ears, even if you can't sing, if you can't play a note on any instrument, music is still in you. Because you can feel it. It's like a magnet connecting with another magnet. We are all touched by it in some way or another. And think about how music, how it also helps elevate other art forms. Like think about when you're seeing a great film, when the performance of an actor, the cinematographer, the director's choice and everything, and then of course, and then the music brings it all together, it makes, magic. And it's the same thing, and part of that magic is the music, obviously. Before there was sound in films, they would have music playing with films to sort of inform what you're supposed to be feeling, which I think was probably even more important back in a time when there was probably more, you're watching a silent film. Who knows how much of the population was even literate? So the music would help you. If you couldn't read the words that would pop up, the music would help inform what you're supposed to be feeling. It's like when you see a great foreign film and you don't speak the language, but when the performances are so good and it's such a, what's happening, even if you don't know what they're saying. You can feel it. It's that connection, but
you can also tell what's coming.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I'll tell you what though, Gage. I got a list of names that make up the greatest hits of Creep Street.
Oh yeah? Who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers. Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lungfist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the oh-so-suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Vieren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, yes, folks. Head on over to patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast if you want to join that gang, that band, that motley crew of Creep Street devotees. Once again, that is patreon.com/creepstreetpodcast. Notes of fall in the air, which means Halloween is just around the corner, folks.
Yes.
We are going to go all out for everybody. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.